Why medieval royalty married their cousins in the grand halls of medieval Europe, where power was everything and bloodlines determined destiny. A practice that seems shocking to modern eyes was not only common, but considered essential. Royal cousins marrying each other. Today, we uncover the complex web of politics, religion, and survival that drove medieval royalty to keep their bloodlines dangerously close. Welcome to a world where marriage was never about love, but about maintaining power, securing alliances, and preserving what medieval rulers valued most: the purity of royal blood. To understand why medieval royalty married their cousins, we must first understand the world they inhabited. Medieval Europe was a patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, and territories, each jealously guarding their power. In this landscape, marriage was the ultimate diplomatic tool. When King Louis VII of France married Eleanor of Aquitaine in 1137, he wasn't just gaining a bride, he was acquiring vast territories that doubled the size of his kingdom. But Eleanor was his distant cousin, a relationship that would have raised eyebrows in any other context. In medieval royalty, it was simply business as usual. Medieval rulers operated under what historians call the divine right of kings, the belief that royal blood was literally blessed by God. To dilute this sacred bloodline with common blood was seen as both politically dangerous and spiritually heretical. This concept of sacred bloodlines created an impossible puzzle. Royal families needed to marry other royals to maintain their divine status, but the pool of suitable candidates was shockingly small. Imagine you're a medieval king seeking a bride for your son. Your options are severely limited. She must be of royal blood, unmarried, of childbearing age, and from a family that either strengthens your alliances or neutralizes your enemies. In a continent with fewer than 20 major royal houses, the mathematics become brutal. The Habsburg dynasty of Austria took this to extremes that would make modern geneticists weep. For over 200 years, they practiced what historians call strategic inbreeding, marrying uncles to nieces and first cousins to first cousins, all in pursuit of keeping their vast European territories unified. The Habsburg motto was, "Let others wage war. You, happy Austria, marry." But what they were really saying was, "Let others wage war. We'll marry our relatives to avoid losing our empire to inheritance disputes." The results were visible in their faces. The infamous Habsburg jaw, a protruding lower jaw that made eating difficult, became more pronounced with each generation of cousin marriages. Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg king of Spain, was so inbred that he could barely speak or eat solid food, yet he was considered the pinnacle of royal breeding. The Catholic Church's position on cousin marriage created a fascinating contradiction. Canon law prohibited marriages between relatives closer than seventh cousins, a restriction so broad that it made almost any noble marriage technically forbidden. But the Church was also a political institution, dependent on royal patronage and support. This led to a lucrative business in papal dispensations, official permissions to marry relatives. For the right price and political considerations, the Pope could make any marriage blessed in the eyes of God. The Church's records show thousands of dispensations granted to royal families. It was understood that the rules of ordinary Christians simply didn't apply to those chosen by God to rule. While peasants and merchants faced excommunication for marrying distant cousins, kings and queens received papal blessings for marrying their uncles' daughters. The double standard was as obvious as it was profitable for the Church. Perhaps nowhere was the importance of royal marriage more evident than in the complex web of succession crises that plagued medieval Europe. The 100 Years' War between England and France began partly because Edward III of England claimed the French throne through his mother's bloodline, a claim that mixed marriage politics with international warfare. Isabella of France, known to history as the She-Wolf of France, married her cousin Edward II of England in 1308. This marriage was supposed to bring peace between the two kingdoms. Instead, it led to Edward's deposition and murder, with Isabella playing a central role in his downfall. Royal women in medieval times were essentially human treaties. They carried the genetic legitimacy of their birth families and the political obligations of their married families. Cousin marriages intensified these pressures exponentially. The human cost of these political calculations was enormous. Royal families experienced rates of infant mortality, mental illness, and physical deformity that far exceeded those of common families. But in the medieval mindset, these were acceptable losses in the pursuit of maintaining divine bloodlines. Medieval people had no understanding of genetics, but they could observe the results. When the same distinctive features appeared generation after generation, the Habsburg jaw, the Bourbon nose, the Tudor red hair, they saw it as proof of royal breeding success, not its danger. What we now recognize as genetic disorders, medieval people interpreted as marks of divine favor. The more unusual a royal child looked, the more special they were considered to be. This twisted logic kept the cycle of cousin marriages spinning for centuries. The Renaissance began to crack the foundations of medieval marriage politics. As trade expanded and new noble families rose to prominence, the old restrictions on royal marriage began to seem less like divine law and more like dangerous tradition. The Protestant Reformation dealt another blow to the system. Protestant kingdoms, freed from papal authority, began to question whether God truly cared about the purity of royal bloodlines or the Church's expensive dispensations. But it was the gradual understanding of heredity that finally ended the age of cousin marriages. As royal families began to connect their children's health problems with their marriage practices, the calculus of power slowly began to change. Today, when we see modern royals marry commoners with no royal blood whatsoever, we're witnessing the complete reversal of 1,000 years of European royal tradition. The idea that seems natural to us would have been incomprehensible to medieval minds. The practice of royal cousin marriage wasn't born from ignorance or perversion, but from a logical response to the constraints of medieval life. In a world where political survival meant everything and the pool of acceptable partners was impossibly small, keeping it in the family seemed like the only rational choice. The bloodlines they fought so hard to preserve ultimately proved less important than the political systems they helped create. But their story reminds us that what seems obvious to one generation can seem impossible to another, and that the most powerful people in history were often trapped by the very traditions that gave them their power. Medieval royalty married their cousins not despite the risks, but because they believed the alternative, losing their divine right to rule, was a far greater danger than any genetic gamble they might take. When the dying Edward VI was persuaded to bypass his half-sisters Mary and Elizabeth in favor of Jane to keep England Protestant, she reluctantly accepted the crown she had never wanted and never sought. Her reign lasted only 9 days before Mary Tudor successfully claimed the throne with overwhelming popular support. Jane immediately surrendered and was imprisoned in the Tower of London. Initially, Mary was inclined to spare her young cousin, recognizing Jane as a victim of others' ambitions rather than a genuine conspirator against the crown. Jane's fate was sealed by Sir Thomas Wyatt's rebellion against Mary's planned marriage to Philip II of Spain. Though Jane had absolutely nothing to do with the uprising, her father's involvement and her continued existence as a potential rallying point for Protestant resistance convinced Mary that Jane was too dangerous to remain alive. On the morning of her execution, Jane watched from her prison window as her husband, Guildford Dudley, was beheaded on Tower Hill. Hours later, she walked with remarkable composure to her own execution on Tower Green. Her final speech was extraordinary for its dignity and faith. She asked the executioner to dispatch me quickly, and after placing her head on the block, died with a single stroke of the axe. Lady Jane Grey's execution became a powerful symbol of innocent victimhood and the brutal realities of Tudor politics. Her death highlighted how royal blood could be both a blessing and a deadly curse, making individuals targets in power struggles they never initiated or desired to join. These 5 royal executions reveal common themes that transcend their specific historical contexts. They demonstrate how the ultimate punishment could eliminate political threats, end entire dynastic lines, and send powerful messages about the changing nature of power itself. Each execution shocked the world differently, some through their public spectacle, others through their secretive brutality. They marked crucial turning points in history, from the end of absolute monarchy to the rise of republican ideals. Most importantly, they remind us that throughout history, royal blood provided no ultimate protection against the changing tides of political fortune and popular will. Egyptian pharaohs were considered married to the goddesses of Egypt. Female pharaohs navigated this by emphasizing their roles as divine mothers and protectors of the realm. The forgotten world of Egypt's female pharaohs teaches us profound lessons about power, gender, and the deliberate construction of historical narratives. For over 3,000 years, women regularly ruled one of history's most powerful civilizations as absolute monarchs, military leaders, and living goddesses. They built monuments that still inspire awe, led armies to victory, and govern millions of subjects with divine authority. These remarkable women were systematically erased from history, not because they failed as rulers, but because they succeeded too well. Their achievements threatened male-dominated power structures that preferred to pretend women had never wielded such authority. Every time we discover another forgotten female pharaoh, we're reminded that women's exclusion from power hasn't been natural or inevitable. It's been artificial and deliberately constructed. These ancient queens prove that women have always been capable of absolute leadership. During their reigns, Egypt experienced some of its greatest periods of prosperity, artistic achievement, and territorial expansion. Their success demonstrates that diverse leadership strengthens rather than weakens civilizations. Egypt's female pharaohs didn't just rule. They ruled extraordinarily well. Their stories were hidden, but their achievements were real. These forgotten queens remind us that women have always been capable of absolute power. We just haven't always been allowed to remember them. Today, we choose to remember, honor, and learn from the remarkable women who ruled as gods in ancient Egypt.